The judge has declared a mistrial in the Christopher Taylor murder trial after the jury could not reach the verdict. Taylor is the Austin police officer who shot and killed Michael Ramos while responding to a call back in April 2020. The judge just made that decision here just a couple of minutes ago, Tony, saying that after extensive deliberation, that jury just could not reach that unanimous decision needed to convict Christopher Taylor.
And Jenny, this has been brewing for days. Anyone who has been watching this case over time has thought that this case was headed toward a mistrial. And the reason that is thought to be the case, Jenny, is because of the notes that the jurors were sending out to the judge, indicating that they were in fact deadlocked, that they were not going to be able to get past the contention in that jury room to try to decide one way or the other whether or not Christopher Taylor committed murder in April 2020 when he shot Michael Ramos.
And not just one note, Tony. We just heard from the judge a total of 3 notes, and she even gave us dates. On November 9th, that first note coming in saying that the jury was at a standstill. 11:13 at 11:05 a.m., another note. No minds have been changed. No decision has been reached. And that's when she issued that Allen charge.
And that was a real turning point in this case as well. An Allen charge is essentially an instruction from the judge. It's sometimes called a dynamite charge. And it's essentially the judge saying to the jury, keep trying harder to come up with a resolution. Those charges, it's a Supreme Court case, the Allen case, in which the Supreme Court ruled that judges could say to jurors, as the judge in this case did say to jurors, if the same facts were presented at a later date to a different jury, they're going to have the same evidence, they're going to look at the same evidence, they're going to have the same kind of difficulty potentially in coming up with a verdict, guilt or innocence. And one of the strongest things that this says is not only should the jury keep working, but they should do so in a way, Jenny, and the judge said that again this morning, that does not violate their conscience. In other words, don't do anything that you could not live with. And the jury saying this morning in that note at 9:20 to the judge, we cannot move beyond where we are without violating our conscience.
Important to point out, too, that the jury said we've re-examined after that Allen charge. We have re-examined all the evidence, sent more questions to the court about testimony from the 3 officers. And today, after 34 hours of deliberation, 4 days of deliberation, this jury still cannot come up with a decision about the guilt or innocence of APD officer Christopher Taylor.
And Jenny, let's go back in time to talk about this case because it was controversial from the start. It happened in April 2020. It fueled our social justice protests here in Austin the following month. But in April 2020, Officer Christopher Taylor and other officers descended on a Southeast Austin apartment complex parking lot. They were called to that scene from a caller who reported possible drug dealing in that area. And so they descended onto that parking lot. There was an interaction between Michael Ramos, who was in a Toyota Prius, and the police officers. We saw this because it was released on body camera. But during this interaction, and you can see it there.
We're looking at that.
We're looking at it right now. Officers did use a so-called beanbag round on Michael Ramos because they said he was not complying with their orders. A short time later, Michael Ramos got in that Toyota Prius and began driving. And it was at that point, Jenny, when Officer Christopher Taylor fired his weapon at Michael Ramos, killing him there at that scene. During this court trial that has unfolded over the past 3 weeks, prosecutors have argued that it was an unjustified shooting, that Christopher Taylor, they pointed out, was the only officer who fired. And they also point out, according to the state, according to prosecutors, that Michael Ramos was only attempting to flee. But on the other side of the courtroom, the defense has strenuously argued that Christopher Taylor believed that his life was on the line, and perhaps more importantly, the life of his fellow officers were on the line. He thought that they could be struck and injured, possibly killed by the moving car, and that is the reason he opened fire.
Yeah, and that is the background. Let's go ahead and take a listen to what Judge Dana Blasey just announced a few minutes ago.
After reviewing the notes of the parties and the response of the state and the defense, the court finds that there is a manifest necessity that requires me to declare this case as a mistrial, and I so declare.
So, Jenny, the big question now, of course, is what comes next?
Right.
And
the second mistrial, Tony. So, yeah, what is next?
it is the second mistrial. The first mistrial was declared prior to a jury even being seated in that case. But this trial, the mistrial occurred after a full airing of all of the evidence. So what this means is that Travis County District Attorney Jose Garza will have to sit down with his team in coming days and coming weeks and try to determine whether or not they are going to retry this case. That is a decision that he will make. If they decide to retry it, it will be set on the docket and will be heard again at some point in the future. If he decides not to try this case again, there would likely be some effort by the state and by Christopher Taylor's defense to resolve the case in some other way. Jenny, I do want to point out, Christopher Taylor is in a unique position in that, in addition to this murder charge he faces in Michael Ramos's death, he faces a second murder charge in an unrelated shooting that happened in 2019 in a downtown Austin condo complex when he and a fellow officer, they're actually both charged with murder, fired on a man who family members say was suffering a mental health issue that day. The officers have said that he came toward them with a knife, and that is when they opened fire. But it is definitely noteworthy and unique that Christopher Taylor faces not one, but two murder charges, now two unresolved murder charges in our county.
And if you're just joining us 10:30 this morning, we just heard after 34 hours of deliberation, Travis County jury came back and could not make a decision, could not decide the fate of Officer Christopher Taylor. And so you've been covering this trial for quite a bit. What are some of your legal experts saying is significant about this?
Well, first of all, I did some homework to try to figure out how rare it is for mistrials to be declared here in Travis County. And it is unusual. We've only had about 5 to 6 cases that were declared a mistrial in Austin, in Travis County, over the past 3 years among about 75 total felony cases. These are felony cases we are talking about. So it is unusual. But when you look at these types of cases more broadly across the state and across the nation, mistrials are unusual. Again, not just here locally, but across the state and across the nation as well. So the big question now is what happens next.
Well,